I was wondering if I could ask the Chief Minister, but more importantly this morning, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, whether the Isle of Man has a housing crisis and if he'll make a statement.
Well, the Chief Minister, to the question is tabled. Mr Quayle.
Thank you, Mr President, and I would like to thank the honourable member for his question. The term crisis strikes in most people a sense of urgency and a desire to pin down what is meant. It could be argued that it is a strong expression of there not being enough affordable housing to go around. A simple answer could be to get on and build more homes. I think ahead of any declaration that there is any sort of crisis, we need to ask, what is the situation now? What is government going to respond to the situation? And what does it need to do better? What does it need to do differently? To my mind, Mr President, the crux of our responsibilities on housing matters is to remain committed to do all that we can to face the challenges of housing our population and to plan ahead, anticipating new challenges and changing needs. This administration is already working to a clear programme. In our aim to be inclusive and caring as a nation, we are working to an outcome of having affordable and accessible housing which meets our social and economic needs. We will be judged on our achievements and whether, in fact, on the matter of housing, we have met the needs of our community. Housing provision is a complex and emotive issue. This has been borne out recently in the area plan for the East Public Inquiry. The inspector has now retired to deliberate on many matters and sites, and we all quite naturally will be interested in the report's recommendations. From an affordable housing perspective, the Isle of Man compares very favourably to the United Kingdom, with good quality public sector rental properties, strong stable communities and an ongoing programme of investment which continues to benefit those local authority housing providers wishing to invest in their stock. That said, Mr President, there are many challenges ahead with our changing demographics, smaller households and increasing need for support. However, honourable members, we will continue to work together with our stakeholders from the public and private sectors alike to ensure we address these issues. We are continuing with the area plans, and whilst we await the inspector's report on the East, that plan, upon being approved by the honourable members in this court, will provide opportunities for housing and other development on a range of sites within and on the edge of our towns and villages in the East. I have closely followed the area plan for the East process, and I am confident that the housing providers across the public and private sector have actively been involved in the area planning process. I believe the independent inspector will produce a balanced report for Cabinet Office to consider. It would be premature to comment now upon the broad issues discussed and the specific housing sites proposed in this report, which will be published in full upon receipt. I am sure and I hope you will support me in saying we are travelling in the right direction in addressing the housing needs for the island.
Supplementary, Mr Callister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr President. I thank the Chief Minister or the Minister for the Cabinet Office for his very detailed response. The reason for the question this morning about a potential housing crisis is the conflict in the numbers. I mean, the Cabinet Office continually publish information relating to a housing need of 5,100 for the island, or 2,240 in my constituency or my area within the East. But this goes well beyond what the evidence is saying that we actually need for the island. If we take the Cabinet Office's own inward migration figures of 500, then we only need 3,348 houses for the whole island. If you take where I live in Onchan, or the east of the island, and an inward migration based on the evidence that's actually available at the moment, it's an inward migration of around 380. So we only need 2,500 houses, less the 1,200 houses that's already been built. So I'm trying to establish if there is a housing crisis, or if the Chief Minister believes there may be a housing crisis in the immediate future.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the honourable member for Onchan for his speech. At the end of the day, Mr President, yes, we have said there are a number of properties empty, and it was estimated 5,818 properties. But I think when you look at that data, you have to say that the way we'd collected the data didn't compare with how they do it in the adjacent isles, and they do it by looking at the MUA electricity consumption in those properties to see whether the property is actually being occupied, and for various reasons, whether it's in the middle of a sale, whether it's a holiday let, etc. And that data is being worked on by the MUA, but I think the data virtually shows you can take a naught off off the end of the figure, but we look forward to that data in detail coming from the MUA. That said, Mr. President, I notice a couple of questions that I'm answering today, and I think the independent inspector has heard evidence from all parties at length and in details, and he's now considering that before writing his report. And I give credit to all those members of Tynwald who took the time, and I know some more than others have spent an inordinate amount of time at the public hearing, putting over the concerns of their residents. They were well made. The inspector is an independent expert, and I'm sure he will take on board the comments put forward by individual members of this Honourable Court and the members of the public who obviously have differing opinions, and I think it would not be correct for me to seek to preempt the outcome of these independent considerations.
Honourable Member for Middle, Mr. Shimmons.
Nice speech.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I note that the Chief Minister referred to the issue of vacant properties. And during the summer, the Cabinet Office published its vacant properties report. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that there's lots of interesting information in this report, and particularly in section 4.14 on the report, which stated that properties were unlikely to have been occupied for any significant length of time due to the zero consumption or very low level of consumption of electricity, amounted to 2,368 properties in the report, whereas the executive summary, which was widely reported, covered a total of 664 properties. Would you agree that this executive summary is slightly misleading and does not agree with the body of the report?
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will obviously look into that. Obviously, the figure I'd been given was 600 plus properties as being empty, as shown by the MUA, but I'm happy to clarify that position. But obviously, evidence has been sent to the independent inspector, which I'm sure he will take on board his comments.
Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs. Beecroft.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that actually when he referred to Mr. Callister's speech, does he agree with me that actually his speeches to both the original question and to supplementaries have been longer than Mr. Callister's?
Absolutely.
Minister.
Thank you. I think the point I was trying to make, Honourable Member, was that I wasn't seeing a question. I was getting a speech, not a question. That not how the length of things.
I'll be the determinant of what is a speech and what is a question. I did give a bit of latitude, but members are well aware mustn't make statements during question time, questions only. And with that in mind, Mr. Shimmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Chief Minister commit to work with the Manx Electricity Authority to further investigate the issue of vacant properties on this island and then publish the updated review?
And the Highway Board.
I thank my honourable colleague for Middle, Mr. Shimmons, for this question. And the answer is yes. The Cabinet Office has been working with the MUA to look to see whether it is possible to identify a pattern of occupation through electricity consumption. And I'm more than happy to share that information when we have received it.
Honourable Member, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's quite reassuring to hear that the government is starting to work together as a joint entity in this. The question now for the Chief Minister is when the Cabinet Office is working with the MUA sharing electricity consumption data which can be traced back to individual persons, individual properties through things like the census. My question is what data sharing arrangements has he got in place around that? Is it a legal way of sharing that level of personal data?
Chief Minister.
Thank the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr. Hooper, for his comment. And of course, I'm sure we will all take on board the fact that when we look at data, we ensure that we are following all the rules and guidelines. I think the evidence will be given, I would hope to be given from the MUA, will be a number, not one in such and such a street, etc., where it can be clearly identified who the owner or of said property is. But we will take on board his comments.
Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Does the Chief Minister agree with me that there isn't actually an executive summary of the vacant property report? It must be the foreword to which the Honourable Member was referring, and I apologise for if in any sense my foreword might be construed as misleading, but in actual fact, would the Chief Minister agree the information is presented very clearly in its own terms in the body of the report? Secondly, would the Chief Minister agree with me that the main point here is that we were all eagerly await the independent inspector's report. We've had 3.5 weeks of discussion of evidence, presentation of evidence, and the absolutely crucial thing is to wait for the independent inspector's report that the Cabinet Office and then Tim Wood will review thereafter.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Minister for Policy and Reform, Mr. Thomas, who has obviously dealt with this as his responsibility and therefore is far more knowledgeable on the topic than myself, and therefore I accept and agree with his comments.